'Twas brillig, and the slithy toves did gyre and gimble in the wabe. All mimsy were the borogroves, and the momy raths outgrave. Beware the Jabberwock, my son, the jaws that bite, the claws that catch. Beware the Jube bird, and shun the frumious Bandersnatch. He took his vorpal sword in hand, long time the manxome foe he sought. So rested he by the Tum-Tum tree, and stood a while in thought. And as in uffish thought he stood, the Jabberwock with eyes of flame came whiffling through the tulgey wood, and burbled as it came. 1, 2, 1, 2, and through, the vorpal blade went snicker-snack. He left it dead, and with its head he went galumping back. And hast thou slain the Jabberwock? Come to my arms, my beamish boy. Oh, Frabsus day, canoe, calais, he chortled in his joy. 'Twas brillig, and the slithy toves did gyre and gimble in the wabe. All mimsy were the borogroves, and the momy raths outgrave. The cottage was a thatched one, the outside old and mean, yet everything within that cot was wondrous neat and clean. The night was dark and stormy, the wind was howling wild. A patient mother knelt beside the deathbed of her child. A little worn-out creature, his once bright eyes grown dim. It was a collier's only child. They called him Little Jim. And oh, to see the briny tears fast hurrying down her cheeks, as she offered up a prayer in thought. She was afraid to speak, lest she might waken one she loved far better than her life, for there was all a mother's love in that poor collier's wife. With hands uplifted, see, she kneels beside the sufferer's bed, and prays that he will spare her boy and take herself instead. She gets an answer from the child. Soft fell these words from him: Mother, the angels do so smile and beckon little Jim. I have no pain, dear mother, now, but oh, I am so dry. Just moisten poor Jim's lips again, and mother, don't you cry. With gentle trembling haste she held the teacup to his lips. He smiled to thank her as he took 3 tiny little sips. Tell father when he comes from work I said good night to him, and mother, now I'll go to sleep. Alas, poor little Jim. She saw that he was dying. The child she loved so dear had uttered the last words that she might ever hope to hear. The cottage door was opened. The collier's step is heard. The father and the mother meet, yet neither speak a word. He knew that all was over. He knew his child was dead. He took the candle in his hand and walked towards the bed. His quivering lips gave token of the grief he'd fain conceal, and see, his wife has joined him, the stricken couple kneel. With hearts bowed down with sadness, they humbly ask of him, in heaven once more to meet again their own poor little Jim. I'll tell thee everything I can. There's little to relate. I saw an aged man a-sitting on a gate. Who are you, aged man? I said, and how is it you live? And his answer trickled through my head like water through a sieve. He said, I look for butterflies that sleep among the wheat. I make them into mutton pies and sell them in the street. I sell them unto men, he said, who sail on stormy seas. And that's the way I get my bread. A trifle, if you please. But I was thinking of a plan to dye one's whiskers green, and always use so large a fan that they could not be seen. So having no reply to give to what the old man said, I cried, Come, tell me how you live, and thumped him on the head. His accents mild took up the tale. He said, I go my ways, and when I find a mountain rill, I set it in a blaze, and thence they make a stuff they call Rowland's Macassar oil. Yet 2 halfpenny is all they give me for my toil. But I was thinking of a way to feed oneself on batter, and so go on from day to day, getting a little fatter. I shook him well from side to side until his face was blue. "Come, tell me how you live," I cried, "and what it is you do." He said, "I hunt for haddocks' eyes among the heather bright, and work them into waistcoat buttons in the silent night. And these I do not sell for gold or coin of silvery shine, but for a copper halfpenny, and that will purchase 9. I sometimes dig for buttered rolls, or set limed twigs for crabs. I sometimes search the grassy knolls for wheels of handsome cabs. And that's the way," he gave a wink, "by which I get my wealth. And very gladly will I drink your honour's noble health." I heard him then, for I had just completed my design to keep the Menai Bridge from rust by boiling it in wine. I thanked him much for telling me the way he got his wealth, but chiefly for his wish that he might drink my noble health. And now, if e'er by chance I put my fingers into glue, or madly squeeze a right-hand foot into a left-hand shoe, or if I drop upon my toe a very heavy weight, I weep, for it reminds me so of that old man I used to know, whose look was mild, whose speech was slow, whose hair was whiter than the snow, whose face was very like a crow, with eyes like cinders all aglow, who seemed distracted with his woe, who rocked his body to and fro, and muttered mumblingly and low, as if his mouth were full of dough, who snorted like a buffalo that summer evening long ago, a-sitting on a gate. It was the schooner Hesperus that sailed the wintry sea, and the skipper had taken his little daughter to bear him company. Blue were her eyes as the fairy flax, her cheeks like the dawn of day, and her bosom white as the hawthorn buds that ope in the month of May. The skipper, he stood beside the helm, his pipe was in his mouth, and he watched how the veering floor did blow, the smoke now west, now south. Then up and spake an old sailor, had sailed the Spanish main. "I pray thee, put into yonder port, for I fear a hurricane. Last night the moon had a golden ring, and tonight no moon we see." The skipper, he blew a whiff from his pipe, and a scornful laugh laughed he. Colder and louder blew the wind, a gale from the northeast. The snow fell hissing in the brine, and the billows frothed like yeast. Down came the storm, and smote amain the vessel in its strength. She shuddered and paused like a frighted steed, then leaped her cable's length. Come hither, my little daughter, and do not tremble so, for I can weather the roughest gale that ever wind did blow." He wrapped her warm in his seaman's coat against the stinging blast. He cut a rope from a broken spar and bound her to the mast. "Oh, father, I hear the church bells ring. Oh, say, what may it be?" "'Tis a fog bell on a rock-bound coast," and he steered for the open sea. "Oh, father, I hear the sound of guns. Oh, say, what may it be?" "Some ship in distress that cannot live in such an angry sea." "Oh, father, I see a gleaming light. Oh, say, what may it be?" But the father answered never a word. A frozen corpse was he. Lashed to the helm, all stiff and stark, with his face turned to the skies, the lantern gleamed through the gleaming snow on his fixed and glassy eyes. Then the maiden clasped her hands and prayed that saved she might be, and she thought of Christ who stilled the wave on the lake of Galilee. And fast through the midnight dark and drear, through the whistling sleet and snow, like a sheeted ghost the vessel swept toward the reef of Norman's Woe. And ever the fitful gusts between, a sound came from the land. It was the sound of the trampling surf on the rocks and the hard sea sand. The breakers were right beneath her bows. She drifted a dreary wreck, and a whooping billow swept the crew like icicles from her deck. She struck where the white and fleecy waves looked soft as carded wool, but the cruel rocks, they gored her side like the horns of an angry bull. Her rattling shrouds all sheathed in ice, with the masts went by the board. Like a vessel of glass she stove and sank. Ho, ho, the breakers roared. At daybreak on the bleak sea beach, a fisherman stood aghast to see the form of a maiden fair lashed close to a drifting mast. The salt sea was frozen on her breast, the salt tears in her eyes, and he saw her hair like the brown seaweed on the billows fall and rise. Such was the wreck of the Hesperus in the midnight and the snow. Christ, save us all from a death like this on the reef of Norman's Woe. The sun was shining on the sea, shining with all his might. He did his very best to make the billows smooth and bright, and this was odd because it was the middle of the night. The moon was shining sulkily because she thought the sun had got no business to be there after the day was done. "It's very rude of him," she said, "to come and spoil the fun." The sea was wet as wet could be, the sands were dry as dry. You could not see a cloud because no cloud was in the sky. No birds were flying overhead. There were no birds to fly. The Walrus and the Carpenter were walking close at hand. They wept like anything to see such quantities of sand. "If this were only cleared away," they said, "it would be grand. If 7 maids with 7 mops swept it for half a year, do you suppose," the Walrus said, "that they could get it clear?" "I doubt it," said the Carpenter, and shed a bitter tear. "Oh, oysters, come and walk with us," the Walrus did beseech. "A pleasant walk, a pleasant talk along the briny beach. We cannot do with more than 4 to give a hand to each." The eldest oyster looked at him, but not a word he said. The eldest oyster winked his eye and shook his heavy head, meaning to say he did not choose to leave the oyster bed. But 4 young oysters hurried up, all eager for the treat. Their coats were brushed, their faces washed, their shoes were clean and neat, and this was odd because, you know, they hadn't any feet. 4 other oysters followed them, and yet another 4, and thick and fast they came at last, and more and more and more, all hopping through the frothy waves and scrambling to the shore. The Walrus and the Carpenter walked on a mile or so, and then they rested on a rock conveniently low, and all the little oysters stood and waited in a row. "The time has come," the Walrus said, "to talk of many things, of shoes and ships and sealing wax, of cabbages and kings, and why the sea is boiling hot, and whether pigs have wings." "But wait a bit," the oysters cried, "before we have our chat, for some of us are out of breath and all of us are fat." "No hurry," said the Carpenter. They thanked him much for that. "A loaf of bread," the Walrus said, "is what we chiefly need. Pepper and vinegar besides are very good indeed. Now, if you're ready, oysters dear, we can begin to feed." "But not on us," the oysters cried, turning a little blue. "After such kindness, that would be a dismal thing to do." "The night is fine," the Walrus said. "Do you admire the view? It was so kind of you to come, and you are very nice." The Carpenter said nothing but, "Cut us another slice. I wish you were not quite so deaf. I've had to ask you twice." "It seems a shame," the Walrus said, "to play them such a trick after we brought them out so far and made them trot so quick." The Carpenter said nothing but, "The butter's spread too thick." "I weep for you," the Walrus said. "I deeply sympathize." With sobs and tears, he sorted out those of the largest size, holding his pocket handkerchief before his streaming eyes. "Oh, oysters," said the Carpenter, "you've had a pleasant run. Shall we be trotting home again?" But answer came there none, and this was scarcely odd because they'd eaten every one. It is Christmas Day in the workhouse, and the cold bare walls are bright with garlands of green and holly, and the place is a pleasant sight, for with clean washed hands and faces in a long and hungry line, the paupers sit at the tables, for this is the hour they dine. And the guardians and their ladies, although the wind is east, have come in their furs and wrappers to watch their charges feast, to smile and be condescending, put pudding on pauper plates, to be hosts at the workhouse banquet they've paid for with the rates. Oh, the paupers are meek and lowly with their thank-ye kindly mums. So long as they fill their stomachs, what matter it whence it comes? But one of the old men mutters and pushes his plate aside. "Great God," he cries, "but it chokes me.
for this is the day she died.
The guardians gazed in horror. The master's face went white.
Did a pauper refuse the pudding?
Could their ears believe aright? Then the ladies clutched their husbands, thinking the man would die, struck by a bolt or something, by the outraged one on high. But the paupers sat for a moment, then rose mid a silence grim, for the others had ceased to chatter and trembled in every limb. He looked at the guardians' ladies, then eyeing their lords, he said, I eat not the food of villains whose hands are foul and red,
whose victims cry for vengeance from their dank, unhallowed graves. He is drunk, said the workhouse master, or else he's mad and raves. Not drunk or mad, cried the pauper, but only a hunted beast who, torn by the hounds and mangled, declines the vulture's feast. I cannot curse for the guardians, and I won't be dragged away. Just let me have the fit out. It's only on Christmas Day that the black past comes to goad me and prey on my burning brain. I'll tell you the rest in a whisper. I swear I won't shout again. Keep your hands off me, curse you. Hear me right out to the end. You come here to see how paupers the season of Christmas spend. You come here to watch us feeding as they watch the captured beast. Hear why a penniless pauper spits on your paltry feast. Do you think I will take your bounty and let you smile and think you're doing a noble action with the parish's meat and drink? Where is my wife, you traitors? The poor old wife you slew. Yes, by the God above us, my Nance was killed by you. Last winter, my wife lay dying, starved in a filthy den. I had never been to the parish. I came to the parish then. I swallowed my pride in coming, for ere the ruin came, I held up my head as a trader, and I bore a spotless name. I came to the parish craving bread for a starving wife, bread for the woman who'd loved me through 50 years of life. And what do you think they told me, mocking my awful grief? That the house was open to us, but they wouldn't give out relief. I slunk to the filthy alley. It was a cold, raw Christmas Eve, and the bakers' shops were open, tempting a man to thieve. But I clenched my fists together, holding my head awry. So I came to her empty-handed and mournfully told her why. And I told her the house was open. She had heard of the ways of that, but her bloodless cheeks went crimson, and up in her rags she sat, crying, Bide the Christmas here, John. We've never had one apart. I think I can bear the hunger. The other would break my heart. All through that eve I watched her, holding her hand in mine, praying the Lord and weeping till my lips were salt as brine. I asked her once if she hungered, and as she answered, no, the moon shone in at the window, set in a wreath of snow. Then the room was bathed in glory, and I saw in my darling's eyes the faraway look of wonder that comes when the spirit flies. And her lips were parched and parted, and her reason came and went, for she raved of our home in Devon, where our happiest years were spent. And the accents long forgotten came back to the tongue once more, for she talked like the country lassie I wooed by the Devon shore. And she rose to her feet and trembled and fell on the rags and moaned and, Give me a crust, I'm famished for the love of God, she groaned. I rushed from the room like a madman and flew to the workhouse gate, crying, Food for a dying woman. And the answer came, Too late. They drove me away with curses. Then I fought with a dog in the street and tore from the mongrel's clutches a crust he was trying to eat. Back through the filthy bylanes, back through the trampled slush, up to the crazy garret, wrapped in an awful hush. My heart sank down at the threshold, and I paused with a sudden thrill, for there, in the silvery moonlight, my Nance lay cold and still. Up to the blackened ceiling, the sunken eyes were cast. I knew on those lips all bloodless my name had been the last. She'd called for her absent husband. Oh, God, had I but known. Had called in vain and in anguish. Had died in that den alone. Yes, there in a land of plenty lay a loving woman dead, cruelly starved and murdered for a loaf of the parish bread. At yonder gate last Christmas I craved for a human life. You who would feast us paupers, what of my murdered wife? There, get ye gone to your dinners, don't mind me in the least. Think of the happy paupers eating your Christmas feast, and when you recount their blessings in your smug parochial way, say what you did for me, too, only last Christmas Day.
There's a one-eyed yellow idol to the north of Kathmandu. There's a little marble cross below the town. There's a broken-hearted woman tends the grave of mad Karoo, and the yellow god forever gazes down. He was known as Mad Karoo by the subs at Kathmandu. He was hotter than they felt inclined to tell. But for all his foolish pranks, he was worshipped in the ranks, and the colonel's daughter smiled on him as well. He had loved her all along with a passion of the strong. The fact that she loved him was plain to all. She was nearly 21, and arrangements had begun to celebrate her birthday with a ball. He wrote to ask what present she would like from Mad Karoo. They met next day as he dismissed a squad. And jestingly she told him then that nothing else would do but the green eye of the little yellow god. On the night before the dance, Mad Karoo seemed in a trance, and they chaffed him as they puffed at their cigars. But for once he failed to smile, and he sat alone a while, then went out into the night beneath the stars. He returned before the dawn with his shirt and tunic torn and a gash across his temple dripping red. He was patched up right away, and he slept through all the day, and the colonel's daughter watched beside his bed. He woke at last and asked if they could send his tunic through. She brought it, and he thanked her with a nod. He bade her search the pocket, saying, "That's from Mad Karoo." And she found the little green eye of the god. She upbraided poor Karoo in the way that women do, though both her eyes were strangely hot and wet. But she wouldn't take the stone, and Mad Karoo was left alone with the jewel that he chanced his life to get. When the ball was at its height on that still and tropic night, she thought of him and hastened to his room. As she crossed the barrack square, she could hear the dreamy air of a waltz tune softly stealing through the gloom. His door was open wide, with silver moonlight shining through. The place was wet and slippery where she trod. An ugly knife lay buried in the heart of Mad Karoo. 'Twas the vengeance of the little yellow god.
There's a one-eyed yellow idol to the north of Kathmandu. There's a little marble cross below the town. There's a broken-hearted woman tends the grave of Mad Karoo,
and the yellow god forever gazes down. The Pobble who has no toes had once as many as we. When they said, "Some day you may lose them all," he replied, "First fiddle-dee-dee." And his Aunt Jabisca made him drink lavender water tinged with pink, for she said, "The world in general knows there's nothing so good for a Pobble's toes." The Pobble who has no toes swam across the Bristol Channel, but before he set out he wrapped his nose in a piece of scarlet flannel, for his Aunt Jabisca said no harm can come to his toes if his nose is warm, and it's perfectly known that a Pobble's toes are safe, provided he minds his nose. The Pobble swam fast and well, and when boats or ships came near him, he tinkledy-binkledy winkled a bell so that all the world could hear him, and all the sailors and admirals cried when they saw him nearing the further side, "He's gone to fish for his Aunt Jabisca's runcible cat with crimson whiskers." But before he touched the shore of the Bristol Channel, a sea-green porpoise carried away his wrapper of scarlet flannel, and when he came to observe his feet, formerly garnished with toes so neat, his face at once became forlorn on perceiving that all his toes were gone. And nobody ever knew, from that dark day to the present, whoso had taken the Pobble's toes in a manner so far from pleasant. Whether the shrimps or crawfish grey or crafty mermaids stole them away, nobody knew, nobody knows how the Pobble was robbed of his twice 5 toes. The Pobble who has no toes was placed in a friendly bark, and they rowed him back and carried him up to his Aunt Jabisca's park. And she made him a feast at his earnest wish of eggs and buttercups fried with fish. And she said, "It's a fact the whole world knows that Pobbles are happier without their toes." The boy stood on the burning deck, whence all but he had fled. The flame that lit the battle's wreck shone round him o'er the dead. Yet beautiful and bright he stood, as born to rule the storm, a creature of heroic blood, a proud, though childlike form. The flames rolled on, he would not go without his father's word. That father, faint in death below, his voice no longer heard. He called aloud, "Say, father, say, if yet my task is done." He knew not that the chieftain lay unconscious of his son. "Speak, father," once again he cried, "if I may yet be gone." And but the booming shots replied, and fast the flames rolled on. Upon his brow he felt their breath, and in his waving hair, and looked from that lone post of death in still yet brave despair, and shouted but once more aloud, "My father, must I stay?" While o'er him far through sail and shroud the wreathing fire made way. They wrapped the ship in splendor wild, they caught the flag on high, and streamed above the gallant child like banners in the sky. There came a burst of thunder sound. The boy, oh, where was he? Ask of the winds that far around with fragments strewed the sea, with mast and helm and pennon fair that well had borne their part. But the noblest thing which perished there was that young, faithful heart. "You are old, Father William," the young man said, "and your hair has become very white, and yet you incessantly stand on your head. Do you think at your age it is right?"
"In my youth," Father William replied to his son, "I feared it might injure the brain, but now that I am perfectly sure I have none, why, I do it again and again."
"You are old," said the youth, "as I mentioned before, and have grown most uncommonly fat. Yet you turned a back somersault in at the door. Pray, what is the reason of that?"
"In my youth," said the sage, as he shook his grey locks, "I kept all my limbs very supple. By the use of this ointment, 1 shilling the box, allow me to sell you a couple."
"You are old," said the youth, "and your jaws are too weak for anything tougher than suet. Yet you finished the goose with the bones and the beak. Pray, how did you manage to do it?"
"In my youth," said his father, "I took to the law and argued each case with my wife, and the muscular strength which it gave to my jaw has lasted the rest of my life."
"You are old," said the youth. "One would hardly suppose that your eye was as steady as ever, yet you balance an eel on the end of your nose. What made you so awfully clever?"
"I have answered 3 questions, and that is enough," said his father. "Don't give yourself airs. Do you think I can listen all day to such stuff? Be off, or I'll kick you downstairs."
Billy's dead and gone to glory. So is Billy's sister, Nell. There's a tale I know about them, were I poet I would tell. Soft it comes with perfume laden, like a breath of country air, wafted down the filthy alley, bringing fragrant odors there. In that vile and filthy alley, long ago, one winter's day, dying quick of want and fever, hapless, patient Billy lay, while beside him sat his sister in the garret's dismal gloom, cheering with her gentle presence Billy's pathway to the tomb. Many a tale of elf and fairy did she tell the dying child, till his eyes half lost their anguish and his worn, wan features smiled. Tales herself had heard haphazard, caught amid the Babel roar, lisped about by tiny gossips playing round their mother's door. Then she felt his wasted fingers tighten feebly as she told how beyond this dismal alley lay a land of shining gold, where when all the pain was over, where when all the tears were shed, he would be a white-frocked angel with a gold thing on his head. Then she told some garbled story of a kind-eyed Saviour's love, how he'd built for little children great big playgrounds up above, where they sang and played at hopscotch and horses all the day, and where beadles and policemen never frightened them away. This was Nell's idea of heaven, just a bit of what she'd heard, with a little bit invented and a little bit inferred. But her brother lay and listened, and he seemed to understand, for he closed his eyes and murmured he could see the promised land. "Yes," he whispered, "I can see it. I can see it, Sister Nell. Oh, the children look so happy, and they're all so strong and well. I can see them there with Jesus. He is playing with them too. Let us run away and join them, if there's room for me and you." She was 8, this little maiden, and her life had all been spent in the garret and the alley where they starved to pay the rent, where a drunken father's curses and a drunken mother's blows drove her forth into the gutter from the day's dawn to its close. But she knew enough, this outcast, just to tell the sinking boy, "You must die before you're able all these blessings to enjoy. You must die," she whispered. "Billy and I are not even ill, but I'll come to you, dear brother. Yes, I promise that I will. You are dying, little brother. You are dying, oh, so fast. I heard Father say to Mother that he knew you couldn't last. They will put you in a coffin, then you'll wake up and be there, while I'm left alone to suffer in this garret bleak and bare." "Yes, I know it," answered Billy. "Ah, but sister, I don't mind. Gentle Jesus will not beat me. He's not cruel or unkind. But I can't help thinking, Nellie, I should like to take away something, sister, that you gave me, I might look at every day. In the summer, you remember how the mission took us out to a great green, lovely meadow where we played and ran about, and the van that took us halted by a sweet, bright patch of land where the fine red blossoms grew, dear, half as big as Mother's hand. Now, I asked the good kind teacher what they called such flowers as those, and he told me, I remember, that the pretty name was Rose. I've never seen them since, dear. How I wish that I had one, just to keep and think of you, Nell, when I'm up beyond the sun." Not a word said little Nellie, but at night when Billy slept, on she flung her scanty garments, and then down the stairs she crept. Through the silent streets of London she ran nimbly as a fawn, running on and running ever till the night had changed to dawn. When the foggy sun had risen and the mist had cleared away, all around her, wrapped in snowdrift, there the open country lay. She was tired, her limbs were frozen, and the roads had cut her feet. But there came no flowery gardens her poor tearful eyes to greet. She had traced the road by asking, she had learnt the way to go. She had found the famous meadow, it was wrapped in cruel snow. Not a buttercup or daisy, not a single verdant blade showed its head above its prison. Then she knelt her down and prayed. With her eyes upcast to heaven, down she sank upon the ground, and she prayed to God to tell her where the roses might be found. Then the cold blast numbed her senses, and her sight grew strangely dim, and a sudden awful tremor seemed to seize her every limb. "Oh, a rose," she moaned. "Good Jesus, just a rose to take to Bill." And as she prayed, a chariot came thundering down the hill, and a lady sat there toying with a red rose, rare and sweet. As she passed, she flung it from her, and it fell at Nellie's feet. Just a word her lord had spoken caused her ladyship to fret, and the rose had been his present, so she flung it in a pet. But the poor half-blinded Nellie thought it fallen from the skies, and she murmured, "Thank you, Jesus," as she clasped the dainty prize. Lo, that night from out the alley did a child's soul pass away, from dirt and sin and misery to where God's children play. Lo, that night a wild, fierce snowstorm burst in fury o'er the land, and that morn they found Nell frozen with the red rose in her hand. Billy's dead and gone to glory. So is Billy's sister, Nell. Am I bold to say this happened in the land where angels dwell? That the children met in heaven after all their earthly woes, and that Nellie kissed her brother and said, "Billy, here's your rose." From his shoulder, Hiawatha took the camera of rosewood, made of sliding, folding rosewood, neatly put it all together. In its case it lay compactly folded into nearly nothing, but he opened out the hinges, pushed and pulled the joints and hinges till it looked all squares and oblongs, like a complicated figure in the second book of Euclid. This he perched upon a tripod, and the family in order sat before him for their pictures. Mystic, awful was the process. First a piece of glass he coated with collodion and plunged it in a bath of lunar caustic, carefully dissolved in water. There he left it certain minutes. Secondly, my Hiawatha made with cunning hand a mixture of the acid pyrogallic and of glacial acetic, and of alcohol and water. This developed all the picture. Finally, he fixed each picture with a saturated solution of a certain salt of soda. Chemists call it hypersulfite. Very difficult the name is for a meter like the present, but periphrasis has done it. All the family in order sat before him for their pictures. Each in turn, as he was taken, volunteered his own suggestions, his invaluable suggestions. First, the governor, the father. He suggested velvet curtains looped about a massive pillar, and the corner of a table, of a rosewood dining table. He would hold a scroll of something, hold it firmly in his left hand. He would keep his right hand buried, like Napoleon, in his waistcoat. He would contemplate the distance with a look of pensive meaning, as of ducks that die in tempests. Grand, heroic was the notion. Yet the picture failed entirely. Failed because he moved a little, moved because he couldn't help it. Next, his better half took courage. She would have her picture taken. She came dressed beyond description, dressed in jewels and in satin, far too gorgeous for an empress. Gracefully she sat down sideways, with a simper, scarcely human, holding in her hand a nosegay rather larger than a cabbage. All the while that she was taking, still the lady chattered like a monkey in the forest. "Am I sitting still?" she asked him. "Is my face enough in profile? Shall I hold the nosegay higher? Will it come into the picture?" And the picture failed completely. Next, the sun, the stunning cantab. He suggested curves of beauty, curves pervading all his figure, which the eye might follow onward till they centered in the breastpin, centered in the golden breastpin. He had learnt it all from Ruskin, author of The Stones of Venice, 7 Lamps of Architecture, Modern Painters, and some others. And perhaps he had not fully understood his whatever was the reason. All was fruitless as the picture ended in an utter failure. Next to him, the eldest daughter. She suggested very little, only asked if he would take her with her look of passive beauty. Her idea of passive beauty was a squinting of the left eye, was a drooping of the right eye, was a smile that went up sideways to the corner of the nostrils. Hiawatha, when she asked him, took no notice of the question, looked as if he hadn't heard it, but when pointedly appealed to, smiled in his peculiar manner, coughed and said it didn't matter, bit his lip and changed the subject. Nor in this was he mistaken, as the picture failed completely. So in turn, the other sisters. Last, the youngest son was taken. Very rough and thick his hair was, very round and red his face was, very dusty was his jacket, very fidgety his manner, and his overbearing sisters called him names he disapproved of, called him Johnny, Daddy's darling, called him Jackie, scrubby schoolboy, and so awful was the picture. In comparison, the others might be thought to have succeeded, to have partially succeeded. Finally, my Hiawatha tumbled all the tribe together, grouped is not the right expression, and as happy chance would have it, did at last obtain a picture, where the faces all succeeded, each came out a perfect likeness. Then they joined and all abused it, unrestrainedly abused it, as the worst and ugliest picture they could possibly have dreamed of, giving one such strange expression, sulkiness, conceit, and meanness. Really, anyone would take us, anyone that didn't know us, for the most unpleasant people. Hiawatha seemed to think so, seemed to think it not unlikely. All together rang their voices, angry, loud, discordant voices, as of dogs that howl in concert, as of cats that wail in chorus. But my Hiawatha's patience, his politeness and his patience unaccountably had vanished, and he left that happy party. Neither did he leave them slowly, with that calm deliberation, that intense deliberation which photographers aspire to, but he left them in a hurry, left them in a mighty hurry, vowing that he would not stand it. Hurriedly he packed his boxes, hurriedly the porter trundled on the barrow all his boxes, hurriedly he took his ticket, hurriedly the train received him, thus departed Hiawatha. Father, dear father, come home with me now. The clock in the steeple strikes 1. You promised, dear father, that you would come home as soon as your day's work was done. Our fire has gone out, our house is all dark, and mother's been watching since tea, with poor brother Benny so sick in her arms, and no one to help her but me. Come home, come home, come home. Please, father, dear father, come home. Hear the sweet voice of the child, which the night winds repeat as they roam. Oh, who could resist this most plaintive of prayers? Please, father, dear father, come home. Father, dear father, come home with me now. The clock in the steeple strikes 2. The night has grown colder and Benny is worse, but he has been calling for you. Indeed, he is worse. Ma says he will die, perhaps before morning shall dawn. And this is the message she sent me to bring. Come quickly, or he will be gone. Come home, come home, come home. Please, father, dear father, come home. Hear the sweet voice of the child, which the night winds repeat as they roam. Oh, who could resist this most plaintive of prayers? Please, father, dear father, come home. Father, dear father, come home with me now. The clock in the steeple strikes 3. The house is so lonely, the hours are so long for poor weeping mother and me. Yes, we are alone. Poor Benny is dead, and gone with the angels of light. And these were the very last words that he said. I want to kiss Papa good night. Come home, come home, come home. Please, father, dear father, come home. Hear the sweet voice of the child, which the night winds repeat as they roam. Oh, who could resist this most plaintive of prayers? Please, father, dear father, come home. When awful darkness and silence reign over the great Gromboolian plain, through the long, long wintry nights, when the angry breakers roar as they beat on the rocky shore, when storm clouds brood on the towering heights of the hills of the Shankly Bore, then through the vast and gloomy dark there moves what seems a fiery spark, a lonely spark with silvery rays, piercing the cold black night, a meteor strange and bright. Hither and thither the vision strays, a single lurid light. Slowly it wanders, pauses, creeps, anon it sparkles, flashes and leaps, and ever as onward it gleaming goes, a light on the bong tree stems it throws, and those who watch at that midnight hour, from hall or terrace or lofty tower, cry as the wild light passes along, the dong, the dong, the wandering dong through the forest goes, the dong, the dong, the dong with a luminous nose. Long years ago, the dong was happy and gay, till he fell in love with a Jumbly girl who came to those shores one day. For the Jumblies came in a sieve, they did, landing at eve near the Zemery Fid, where the oblong oysters grow, and the rocks are smooth and grey. And all the woods and the valleys rang with a chorus they daily and nightly sang. Far and few are the lands where the Jumblies live. Their heads are green and their hands are blue, and they went to sea in a sieve. Happily, happily passed those days while the cheerful Jumblies stayed. They danced in circlets all night long to the plaintive pipe of the lively dong in moonlight, shine or shade. For day and night he was always there by the side of the Jumbly girl so fair, with her sky-blue hands and her sea-green hair, till the morning came of that hateful day, when the Jumblies sailed in their sieve away, and the dong was left on the cruel shore, gazing for evermore, ever keeping his weary eyes on the sea-green sail on the far horizon, singing the Jumbly chorus still as he sate all day on the grassy hill. Far and few are the lands where the Jumblies live. Their heads are green and their hands are blue, and they went to sea in a sieve. But when the sun was low in the west, the dong arose and said, "What little sense I once possessed has quite gone out of my head." And since that day he wandered still by lake and forest, marsh and hill, singing, "Oh, somewhere in valley or plain might I find my jumbly girl again. Forever I'll seek by lake and shore till I find my jumbly girl once more." Playing a pipe with silvery squeaks, since then his jumbly girl he seeks. And because by night he could not see, he gathered the bark of the twangum tree on the flowery plain that grows, and he wove him a wondrous nose, a nose as strange as a nose could be, of vast proportions and painted red, and tied with cords to the back of his head. In a hollow, rounded space it ended, with a luminous lamp within suspended, all fenced about with a bandage stout to prevent the wind from blowing it out, and with holes all round to send the light in gleaming rays on the dismal night. And now each night and all night long over those plains still roams the dong, and above the wail of the chimp and snipe you may hear the squeak of his plaintive pipe, while ever he seeks, but seeks in vain, to meet with his jumbly girl again. Lonely and wild all night he goes, the dong with a luminous nose. And all who watch at the midnight hour, from hall or terrace or lofty tower, cry as they trace the meteor bright, moving along through the dreary night, "This is the hour when forth he goes, the dong with a luminous nose, yonder over the